welcome to our webinar, Analyze, Identify, Improve, User-Driven Process Mining. I am your host today, and my name is Beth Myers. I'm your host, and I am joined by Mark Klein, stellar sales engineer. I'm a previous Decisions employee and now work with Decisions as a consultant, and I'm here excited to share my expertise with you today as we talk about expertise and how to talk with our end users. Before we jump in, we have couple of housekeeping things I want to cover. The first are that we have two upcoming training seminars, Immerse Deep Dive in-person training events. They're coming up. The first is in Denver area, August 8th through the 10th at Table Mountain Event Center in Golden, Colorado. And for the second, we're heading down under to Sydney, Australia at the Museum of Contemporary Art. They are both free to attend, and you can register today at decisions.com/events. The next thing I'd like to chat with you about is give a little plug for our upcoming webinar. We're continuing the series on ChatGPT, and during our next webinar, you can find out how to supercharge the text automation process at our webinar called Master the Merge, Automating ChatGPT Prompts. Learn how to use Decisions Text Merge Editor to pull data directly from your databases, integrations, and web scraping to dynamically generate ChatGPT prompts. Don't miss out. Join now and elevate your text automation skills. The next thing I would like to cover from housekeeping is we'll save some time at the end for Q&A, probably, but don't feel like you have to wait to ask questions. Feel free to use the chat Q&A or chat functions in Zoom to submit questions anytime, and Mark and I will keep an eye on those and try to answer them as they come through. And finally, last piece of housekeeping is that I have a day job. I'm a professor at the University of Minnesota, and I have to let you know that today I'm speaking in my own individual capacity and not representing the University of Minnesota. And now, finally, we can jump into our presentation. In today's agenda, we're going to cover a quick introduction about how Decisions customers use our products today and how and when and why to engage with the end users. I'm going to talk a little bit about how end users think and how to talk to them as experts when we're thinking about them from that perspective. Then I'm going to pass things over to Mark, and Mark's going to talk about how to almost bypass those end users, take that initial information that you've gathered by speaking to them directly, and then mine the underlying process to see if it matches up with what they've told you. Then he'll flip it back over to me, and we'll talk just a little bit at the end about how to co-create with those end users. So let's jump right in. I like starting with our customers because I worked on the sales team when I was at Decisions, and I am so impressed that our customers use Decisions to solve so many types of problems in every industry. My particular background's in healthcare, but our Decisions is used primarily in the finance area, also in the service industry, in addition to healthcare and manufacturing, insurance, education, and government. But in order to use our technology to solve any of the problems, our customers have one thing in common. They all have to build products that resonate with users. To build to those products, we're going to talk about how to engage with those end users. We can engage in two different ways. We can engage with them directly, as I'll talk about, and in true Decisions fashion, we can automate it, which is what Mark's going to talk about, to leverage our data mining to verify, validate, and discover those end user processes. In this first section, the tips that I'll share apply evenly to all project stakeholders, from engaging your executive leadership team to understand the project goals, and all the way over to working with your colleagues or other analysts or decisions builders. And when I'm done talking, I'll let you get into the demo, which people love the live demo much more. But why should you care about including those end users? Personally, sometimes I get crabby and don't like to work with groups of people and get consensus on things. Usually when I get crabby like that, I complain to my husband. And when I was talking to him about it, he gave me this quote. He is actually the crabby developer quoted on this slide. But he offered this sage advice. The sooner you engage with those end users and the more deeply you understand the problems, the faster you can solve the problem that you're trying to solve, and the better off you'll be in the long run. Or as he says, if I don't do it right, they'll continue to bug me. So it's better if I engage them, figure it out, and then just build it the right way. In an expert perspective, the people who study this and are human systems, they study that human systems interaction are called human factors engineers. And in the book called Designing for People, they describe 3 main aims of human factors engineering. These are great goals for you to keep in mind when you're thinking about how to talk to these end users. Why am I going to do it? Number 1, so I can build a better project. And the goals of building a better project are either to increase safety, increase productivity, or increase satisfaction. And they're really easy to incorporate. So when you're working with your executive leadership at the very beginning of your project to set out the goals for the project, you can also keep these in mind. Which one of these do I really need to be stellar at? Safety, satisfaction, or performance, in order to get the best results and the best satisfaction out of those end users. So they will keep me in my job, hire me to do more jobs, and write me rave reviews for the work that I've done. The way that you can incorporate all of these human factors in your build cycle is through the human factors design cycle. It matches very similar steps to any other cycle, like the software development life cycle. It should look kind of familiar to you from that. The human factors design cycle starts with understanding the problem, creating the solution, and then evaluating the solution. And we'll use this as our framework for the rest of our chat time together today. So we can use this human factors design cycle to engage with end users when we're building those no-code projects, talking to them about how to engage before, during, and after. And today we're going to focus mostly on that understand phase. So let's jump right into that. My favorite part. Why do smart people like you and me and your end users who are smart people have a hard time describing their requirements? We'll talk a little bit about the why and then how to help pull those requirements from their heads. So on our next slide, we're talking just about tacit knowledge. And tacit knowledge is the answer to the why can't they just tell you? Tacit knowledge is deeply embedded into individuals' minds, and it's difficult to express. A colleague recently described tacit knowledge to me as, and trying to pull that knowledge from someone, as someone who's trying to describe a song that's in your head that you have to tell someone about without knowing the lyrics or being able to hum or sing it to them. How do you describe that? It's just a song in your head, something that you know very deeply, and it's hard to explain. The reason it's hard to explain is because you're an expert in that area. And humor me for 1 second, because I said I'm also a professor at the U of M. This is my area that I love to study. So I've got my 1 slide and my couple minutes to share this with you before we jump back into how to actually talk to them. When people are building this tacit knowledge, when they're building their expertise, they build it because they have adequate practice and a valid environment. That means, in the case of music, you can become a good singer if you've practiced and practiced and you have a valid environment, someone who actually knows what good singing sounds like to give you feedback to say, yeah, that's a good song. If maybe you had a very generous mother or father when you were growing up and said, oh, your singing is lovely, dear, that would not be a valid environment for you to learn. So you have to develop expertise, either for us or, interesting enough for AI, adequate practice, practicing something enough, 10,000 hours or whatever is appropriate, and valid, timely feedback. And then you have this knowledge that's deeply held in your firm beliefs. That's hard to describe to someone because they haven't gone through the same learning cycle that you have had. With that, thanks for your time of listening to what I'm very passionate about talking about. And let's get this back into talking to your users and understanding what they really need. So because they're experts and they have this tacit knowledge, we're going to start with the human factors design cycle of understanding. So on the left side of that design cycle. And there are some tips that human factors team has for doing that in very specific ways to get information from experts. But we don't have to do that every single time. Instead, let's look at how our customers use decisions and what your use case is for decisions first. So the context for how customers use decisions. In the last few months, I've been helping look at our use cases from our current customer base with decisions. And there can split them a couple of different ways. We showed you already how we can split them by industry, but we can also organize them in this 2x2 function. So on the left side here, we have user interaction. And so we've got the boxes on the left of an API doesn't require very much user interaction, and a simple form requires more user interaction, for examples. And then across the bottom, we have build complexity. So across the bottom examples are an API is really easy to build in decisions. It could take you just a couple minutes to connect to different software with decisions as the middleware and do some data transformation in between there. Now, if you're implementing an entire master data management program on the right, that's a bigger build complexity. So we'll take a deeper dive into these 4 boxes on the next couple slides so you can think about when and how to engage users based off of these boxes. So starting with the 2 on the left, the example that of a low complexity with low user interaction of API, those are things that I recommend based off of Beth's 2x2 here, that you can just do those. They generally have very clear instructions. I need you to connect these and make this field match with each other. It has low complexity. There's minimal or no user interface in the end product. And you can gather the requirements by just listening to them, mostly technical requirements, and only introduce those end users in the post-build evaluation process to make sure that it works. If you have more user interaction with the end product, back to that slide one more time. Chase is moving them for me, thanks. A little bit more user interaction. You need to, something like a form. We have a lot of customers in the education space, and they do things like automate current paper forms or forms that are stored in maybe an Access file or some other type of maintenance, something that's a nightmare to maintain from a maintenance standpoint. So they're automating these paper forms or organizing their current forms. If you're building something like a simple form in decisions, again, it has higher user interaction, but my recommendation is just do what they ask. It's a one-off form, like a permission slip to go camping for your camping class in college. It has low complexity. You have a really good example of what they want the form to look like from what it looked like before. So just gather the user requirements with active listening techniques and build what they want. You can check to make sure that it matches the other one because they're all low complexity builds. On the other hand, on the next slide, when we move to more complexity, you really need to engage those end users much more deeply in either of these cases, either in the bottom box where we're talking about master data management, where you have high complexity, low user interaction. There's still a lot of complexity, even though the end users might not be using this product in a day-to-day. The process has a lot of complexity. And that really is a great place where you have an existing process, you're migrating to decisions for data mining that Mark's going to show you in that automation, because the users might not even know the process themselves. They They think they do, they know what they individually do, but when you look at the data of what actually happens in the process, it's a little bit different. That's a perfect spot to start to get into more process automation of the process mining and understanding that yourself. And on the top end, again, when you're co-creating something like a full application, maybe even a net new application and decisions, you've got high complexity, high user interface, and I would recommend to involve a human factors expert or someone who understands deeply how to pull the requirements, document those requirements, like a senior business analyst, document those requirements, iterate with things like process mining as you go through, and then co-develop with those users to make sure that you're building exactly what they need to have. With those, I'm going to give you a couple of tips for either way. So whenever you're engaging those end users, keep what I said in mind. That's why I talked to you about what I'm passionate about how people build expertise. Know that if you ask someone a simple question, their initial answer might not be the right one. It might not tell you the full story. And so keep in mind that these end users are experts and their tacit knowledge is hard for them to communicate. It's hard for them to tell you what the song is like in their head. Their expertise and point of view are different than yours. And so you need to employ active listening, ask lots of questions to clarify your understanding. And on the next slide, I've even got some books. And if you'd like to learn more about human factors methods, you can do things like do direct observation of those end users to make sure that you can see what the process is. And can you move forward to the next slide, Chase? Yeah. And so there's direct observation. You can sit right in the middle of their process and watch what's happening and document it step by step in workflows. Or you can do things like task analysis and ask them to describe things to you in different ways. And so you can pull in the different pieces of the puzzle together to get the full picture of how it actually works today or should actually work in the future. So these are some great books that have examples of how to do that task analysis. Working Minds is my favorite that I used most recently, but the other ones are great too. So if you're working directly with people, that's the way you have to do it to pull that information out of those experts' heads. But you don't have to do it that way. You could also automate around it. So the next part of our presentation this morning is going to be passing things over to Mark, who's one of our sales engineers. He's going to show you how you can use decisions process mining to look and find the actual processes.
Cool. Thanks, Beth. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Again, good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everyone around the world. Let's talk about what process mining is. But just to set the stage before we get into the deep dive demo of the process mining tool. Process mining, in case we're new to the topic, it applies data science to discover, validate, and improve workflows. So by combining data mining and process analytics, organizations can mine log data from their information systems, so from their current information systems, to understand the performance of their processes. It's going to reveal bottlenecks and other areas of improvement. Process mining simply leverages a data-driven approach to process optimization, allowing users to remain objective in their decision-making around resource allocation for their existing processes. Just to cover some of these bullet points here, process discovery allows you to see your processes for what they really are and not what the often incorrect version we imagine them to be. We can analyze data and expose variations and violations in your processes that don't adhere to your compliance and/or regulation. We can also achieve performance optimization by continually refining your automated processes while we continue tracking changes and analyze costs. We can actually analyze costs of the activities and their associated resources. Let me start sharing my screen, and we'll hop
While
into
you're
the
sharing your screen, there was one question I'm going to jump in with, Mark, while you
Sure. Yeah,
switch
go ahead.
things over. Um, Sean asked if we could just provide more information and detail about who our customer is. And is it a C-suite executive or a line of business manager or someone in engineering? And the answer to that is yes. We have customers who come to decisions directly from the C-suite who say, hey, I need something like this that's going to automate everything within my company. We have customers who are line of business managers who are looking for a tool because they can't get what they need out of IT fast enough. That's a lot of what I've heard. And sometimes we have engineers who say, hey, I need a business rules engine, or I need a no-code solution to help me increase my productivity within my engineering team. So all of those could be the customers. And when we're talking about the end users today, end user is really the person doing the work. So great question. Thanks.
Very good. Good answer as well. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. Right now we're looking at the decisions process mining tool. And today we're going to go through a couple of different activities. We're not going to show all the activities in lieu of time, but certainly circle back around to us if you want to see more, or if you're interested in talking about process mining a little bit more. But today we're going to spend some time here in the modeler, and then we're going to hop over to the compliance checker. We're going to touch a little bit about the variant explorer, and then finally we'll finish up with the visual analyzer. So as we see here in the modeler, this is a BPMN modeling, and what we're looking at currently is a mortgage process. I took it upon myself to talk to some prospects and understand what their current workflow is at an activity level or at a task level. And so what we can do is we can map out a current process. What you can see here as I zoom in, we can see the different steps in their particular mortgage process. We can see a couple decision-making points. We can see some activities happening in parallel. A lot of the decisions that are being made here are humans making decisions. The decisions actually have to do with some of the types of loans that are being processed. The reason why we want to go through this exercise is because we absolutely want to talk to the humans, to the activity owners, to the stakeholders, the line of business department managers, to really understand the end-to-end workflow and the end-to-end process. Because what we can do in this tool is we can expose areas of opportunity by comparing this particular model to what's actually happening. I always refer to that to the real versus the ideal, and this is our ideal process. We could probably spend another 30 minutes talking about some of the other activities in here. For instance, if we were looking to understand how many resources we needed to partake in each activity based off caseloads at a certain period of time, we can turn on some simulation settings and compare those simulations to the current model. But why we have this up, what I'd like to do is hop right over to the compliance checker, because what the compliance checker actually does is reveal that ideal process, which we're looking at now, to what's really happening. And in order to do that, what we have the ability to do with the tool is to import event logs. Event logs can come from any digital system that's activity driven. We just need some specific data points. For instance, we need a unique case ID, or we need activities. We need start times. We need end times of those activities. Added bonus would be resources or the roles they partake in, and any other type of attributes that we want to data mine or process mine. But here we can see a little bit more of an abstract workflow, because what we're doing is we're actually comparing the model that I previously showed you to a event log that came from an external system. Do we always have to look at an event log from an external system? No, of course not. We natively can connect this process mining tool and embed it or natively connect to a decisions process so we can constantly log or keep our eyes open for any areas of improvement within the automation space as well. But again, you'll see the same states here or same activities that I previously showed you. But what's most important is that we're seeing that our ideal versus the real is only 50% compliant. So what does that mean? That means that of all the cases that we're mining, all the mortgage processes that we're mining, we're only 50% accurate, meaning that we're only 50% of these cases are going down the ideal pathway. And so we ask ourselves, why are the other 50% going down another pathway? Well, again, I mentioned that there are individuals, employees, task owners that are making decisions based off, I've always done it this long, I've always done it for as long as I've worked here, no one's told me another way. And so they're making these decisions based off historical events. We can certainly take a deep dive into these, what we'll call handovers here. We'll see some red ones and we'll see some green ones. The red ones actually represent the path gone wrong. It's gone down the wrong pathway, the case or the mortgage has. And we can double click on that particular pathway or handover and start inspecting each individual case and understand what states the case went through. We can understand the time and date stamps. More importantly, we can understand some of the other attributes about the mortgage or this case. We can see the type of loan it is, for instance. This is an FHA loan. We can see what state the originating or the property is, and what kind of residence. So as we step through, we can see any type of anomalies, similarities between the different cases. Not going to take time to go through each individual case, just kind of highlight some of the features here. So for instance, beyond seeing the tabular view or the data view, we can see the pathway of this particular mortgage. I'm going to spend a lot more time talking about the colors and the shapes and what the numbers mean, but just on the surface level, we can see that this path is very linear. I don't see any activities happening in parallel. And so that's something that I would want to explore specifically for FHA loans or loans originating in Texas, something like that, and start isolating some of these attributes here. Just to give you another perspective, we do have the capability of filtering in and out data. So again, we're at 50% compliant with all of the cases that we're currently mining or all these mortgages, but we do have the opportunity to start drilling into specific attributes. So maybe I want to look at all the cases that are, or mortgages that are refinance type mortgages. I don't want to start mining, or I want to omit these purchase type of mortgages, but more focus on the refi. And so when I do that, I immediately see that my refinance type of mortgages are less compliant. So we're not doing as good. We might have different teams taking on the different types of mortgages. So it gives us an opportunity to individually talk to people, understand, again, why cases are going down the wrong pathways, why we're making certain decisions, and those type of activities will drive and expose what we see here. I'm going to turn that filter off. So bear with me, just a little housekeeping and cleanup. And let's kind of move on to the variant.
While you're doing that, we have another question.
Oh yeah, great.
From it is exception-based processing is exceedingly expensive. Do you model cost in this system? Can you model the cost in the system?
So we can absolutely, it wasn't something we're going to cover today, but we certainly have the opportunity to do a cost analysis based off the resources that partake in each activity. So yes, the short answer is yes.
Yeah.
It'll
Thanks.
it'll actually expose the total cost of the workflow. It'll prove out who are most expensive resources, who are less expensive resources, what our most expensive activities are, and those type of high level indicators are.
Great. I love how we can ask people how the process goes and you find out one thing, even if you use all the tips and trips from human factors. But when you look at the data, it shows you something completely different.
Absolutely. Let's skip over to the Variant Explorer, the third out of the 4 activities. What we're seeing here are all the different variations of our process. So I just showed you the compliance checker. It showed us the cases that went off the ideal pathways, but here we can see all the different variations. I know this is a busy screen, but really to sum it up, we're really looking at a subset of 1,000 cases. I do that on purpose because it makes the math easier when I want to prove, or I sit down with a CFO or a CTO and I say, hey, these are the numbers. It's easy math for everybody. We can absolutely do more than 1,000. We can do real-time data if we needed to. But here we have the different variants grouped on the left-hand side. And so just going from top down, we can see that there's 209 out of those 1,000 cases, a little over 20%, that all went down the same pathway. And we can expose that and look at all the cases. So there's 209 cases stacked here on the right-hand side that all went down that same pathway. Me, I'm a visual person. I want to see what that pathway is. So I can quickly jump into that and go, okay, these cases, 209, that's that top number, all went through these 2 activities. I asked myself where the other ones go, right? And so you can see here this second activity, conditional offer extended. I would have to maybe jump into the analyzer and understand where these went. And that's a good segue, and I'll hop over to the visual analyzer in a moment. But just to make note here, 209 of these cases kind of went through these 2 activities and then fell off the map. And I want to know why. So we'll find that out in a moment. I'll keep the suspense there for you. But as we kind of drill into these other variations, we can see that, again, here's another almost 20% of our cases all went through this very linear pathway, 180 cases. They all hit the right activities, but why are things not happening in parallel? Why do we have a bottleneck maybe? And I'll get into what these colors mean, but here there's a bottleneck for loan setup complete. And there's also a bottleneck here for communication. Maybe something to look at. Maybe it's a very manual process. But again, we'll touch on that in a moment. And so the Variant Explorer really exposes all those different pathways and why we're not compliant. Okay. And then finally, what I want to touch on, and I probably could spend a good 2-3 hours in this visual analyzer, because there's a lot to see and a lot of different activities. But very visually, we can see those same activities. And again, the activity name on the top, the number of cases that have gone through, or the mortgages that have gone through each of these activities is this number in the middle. And then in the diamond, it represents the average duration for this activity and all the activities downstream. You'll see as the color of the top goes from a dark blue to a light blue, that is because that activity does not execute as often as the other ones. So maybe I only want to focus on the dark blue one, and I can use some of the toggles up here to hide or expose some of these activities. The bottom number, again, average duration, but just like a traffic light, anything in green means good. The tool has decided for us that activity is happening at a very quick pace, doesn't take a lot of time. But again, here's this orange, yellow, red. Those are the areas I would want to focus on. These are bottlenecks. Again, the tool has derived that these activities are taking longer than all the other activities. Thus, it's in in a traffic light format. The red one, obviously, of course, is our problem child here. I would want to drill into that a little bit more, and I can. Before I do that, let me just kind of vanguard what these lines mean. These are what the tool calls handovers. It's that transition between the activities. And to be very transparent, I spent over a decade in this space doing time and motion gap analysis, sitting around with a clipboard and a stopwatch, right? Wanting to understand from users how long it took to do a loan setup. Why are you typing that into that screen? Why are you have 5 screens, or why are you doing everything on a piece of paper? And then after they're done, I think I missed the transition between the activities, because essentially we can see here in this handover, there's 309 mortgages went from this activity to this activity. It took almost 3.5 weeks for someone to pick up this mortgage or this case. That is an issue. That is a big gap in the process, and it is an opportunity for improvement. Okay, we can expose that. We can look at it at a deeper angle and a different lens. I like to look at it from an activity level first. So what we can see if I double click on an activity is we can actually see the resources. I only have about 10 resources in this particular flow. Some of them work on refinances, some of them work on new purchases, but we can see at a very quick glance that Greg and Ricky partake in this communication piece. I can see very quickly that Greg is doing a little bit more work, activity executions, if you will, than Ricky. But on the top, I can see the distribution of, as it relates to time. Of course, we're about 50% compliant as it relates to a prescribed SLA. So the tool has decided for us that this is the SLA. We do have the opportunity to modify this to see where we fit in if the true SLA is 2 hours or 6 hours. But based off this, I can see that these cases here that are taking longer than 4.5 hours, I can start filtering that data in and out and start isolating on areas of this process where we can improve the entire process for the organization. Same thing would apply for those handovers as well. A couple other things that I always like to dive into here, and I know I'm going to be short of time and Beth's going to cut me off, but I won't have any hard feelings about it, is looking at swim lanes. What I always like to look at are the different roles in this process and which roles are actually partaking in which activities. Again, this was all drawn out automatically just by importing an event log or connecting to a system like Decisions. By the way, we can also natively connect to Salesforce, Jira, ServiceNow, because they're activity-driven systems. But here, this actually exposes a lot for me. I can see this communication piece is being handled by a sales manager role. Might mean to me that the sales manager is juggling a lot of balls at one time. And so they might let this slip a little bit. Maybe it's not at the forefront for them because they're managing people, they're managing other processes, they have other tasks as part of their daily activities. Maybe we need to add another role here. Maybe we need to add someone under the sales manager role to partake in that. A couple other things real quickly, just to kind of get off the plate here. We can see the resources in our process, same numbers, same colors apply as mentioned before. But again, I mentioned that half my group here partakes in new purchase and the other half partakes in refinances. And we can see who's doing good, who's doing bad, where we need to improve in regards to resource allocation, resource management. Again, going back to that costing question, we can expose resource utilization, see who's fastest at what activity or slower activity, and really do a deep dive on those type of things. Again, we can also flip the gears here and look at the roles and see how many cases each department is handling in this instance, and the time it takes. Again, here's that sales manager. We have obviously an issue here with sales managers and the communication, and I would like to know if it's a manual process and how we could automate that a little bit. And with all that being said, I am going to hand that back over to
Hey, before you
Beth.
stop
Oh,
sharing, Mark,
sure.
we've got a couple of follow-up
Oh,
questions.
good. Okay,
Questions beat whatever I have to say every day, so
absolutely.
we'll make some time. You are providing great visibility and control. Do you also provide an executive view of the enterprise against the various layers in the enterprise? Which processes land at the infrastructure layer versus the data layer and the application or the business system layer? And then there's a follow-up question from that.
That's a great question. So this is actually looking at processes isolated one at a time. If we had a process that we had some linking, I'll call it, where we have tasks, subtasks, and I'm talking in very generic terms. What I'd like to do, and I just pulled up the Q&A, and I see Sean asking a lot of questions. What I'd like to do is maybe have a follow-up conversation with you, Sean. Absolutely want to do a deeper dive and really understand your questions a little bit better, so I can answer them to the best of my knowledge. But this is not showing multiple layers. It's really just showing the surface at this time.
Excellent. We'll get you guys connected afterwards. Is there anything else you wanted to share in the demonstration?
I was handing it over to you because I'm going to run out of time. Let me stop my sharing, Beth.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Here.
My favorite part is when you showed the process at the beginning with the expectation of what the users told you versus the reality of the complexity that is real life. And the real life is mirrored in the data when you look at it. And so I can argue from both points. I think it's important for you to talk to end users directly to understand the goals and how the ideal process should work. But looking at the data sure helps you to find out how the process is working today. After we've got all the information we need from those end users, the next step is to follow the rest of that human factors design cycle along with your software development design cycle, life cycle, to co-create with the end users. And I want to tell you a quick story about how to engage those end users in the next part of that design cycle. Yeah, the creation part. And then I'll talk for just a moment about how to evaluate and do some usability studies, and we'll wrap things up and open it up for any additional questions. So let me tell you this story about co-creation with no code, how you can leverage decisions to build software with those end users instead of off in a room by yourself, hard coding the solutions. We worked with a customer who has multiple dev teams, and they run 8-week sprints. And their previous process before decisions were that an analyst, like Mark used to be, would work with the end users, and they would design and build these massive workflow spreadsheets. Like, I'm talking pages that they would have to tape together on a wall to go through the entire workflow and define that workflow. And then they would pass those over to the developers who would break them down into 8-week sprints and then chunk it off and hard code that software 8 weeks at a time to build out what the end users had asked for. So we went out during the sales cycle, actually, and had the end users, the business analysts, and decisions developers all sit around the same table. And we took that big chunk of process that they were planning to hard code in the next 8 weeks and built it out in 2 days, because the end users were able to use decisions. The developers built that not just in a workflow in Visio, but they were able to actually build the software with the no-code tools, drag and drop. The end users then were able to see what the data looked like when we do some simulations in decisions and testing in decisions to see if it worked the way that they had expected it to work and the data flowed the right way, and iterate that right there without having to go back and forth and play this game of telephone, especially with something that's a hard-coded solution that then gets kicked back to the coders after the users see it and said, that's not what I was expecting at all. So decisions and no-code tools are a great way to engage those end users in your building process. The other ways that the last part of that human factors design cycle is the evaluation. And I mentioned a little bit already, decisions have some great testing tools built right in the software for some of those parts of evaluation. But on the next slide, I have some references for you that you can look at for true usability testing. And true usability testing from a human factors standpoint really is more about the end user themselves. So during the test, the participants try to complete tasks that they expect, like QA testing for software, where while an observer watches them, or they're even monitored again with a stopwatch, as Mark mentioned earlier, or even doing things like counting how many clicks does it take them to get the form filled out or to document what they're trying to do. And we pull it back at this phase then from that in the usability phase to those three primary goals that we had up front for satisfaction, safety, and performance. Is the solution meeting all of those goals from a human factors perspective? If you would like to learn more, especially from the demonstration perspective, I strongly encourage you to schedule a full demo. I only kept Mark to about 20 minutes today, and he can talk for hours and hours and hours. So you can pick whatever length of demo you'd like, generally 1 hour at a time, by emailing sales@decisions.com. And Sean, when I answered your question earlier about who our end users are at Decisions, the end user I didn't mention who are end up getting pulled into decisions during the implementation are those business analysts and process improvement specialists. And we'd like you to pull them in earlier. Come show them, invite them to a demo of the decisions process mining with Mark or any other demo of decisions, because these are great tools for them to be able to use as opposed to straight up Visio or other tools that they might be using to engage with end users today. You can engage directly with some of these tools from Decisions. With that, I will open it up to see if there's any additional questions. Excellent. It looks like we've got a couple of questions coming in. Mark, I'll ask them for you.
Sure.
On the spot.
You're all over those Q&A. Go ahead.
I like it. Can do my Vanna White, but she doesn't get to talk, but I pretend it's like the voice. Can you connect process mining to decisions? How does that work?
So absolutely. Like I mentioned, process mining natively connects to decisions, and we can achieve near time. I usually say real time, but it is near time data flow. We can also connect natively to Salesforce, Jira, and ServiceNow. But again, we can ingest or import any type of event log as long as it's an activity-driven event log.
So with decisions and the ability to do flags and notifications of people, could you connect your decisions process into process mining? And then if you find something that's not in compliance in the process mining tool, could you flag that in decisions and flag it back and send a whole notifications and escalation process?
It's coming. Yes, that's exciting. Yes, it's coming. Currently you cannot, but it is coming in a future release of Decisions. Just keep in mind when you're building an application in Decision, make sure that if you want to mine it in process mining, is that it's a stateful process. Typically, we would use a case entity or a flow execution extension to achieve that.
That makes sense. I I'm looking forward to seeing how those things interact because I love the power of decisions to help engage and monitor the process and then engage the end users as how the process is working as it goes through. So it's exciting.
It is. Saves a lot of
Uh,
time too. I remember, again, when I used to partake in these activities in a manual way, how daunting it can be and how long and drawn out process that is. And I always thought to myself, am I really getting the true data? Right? I'm asking a task owner, I'd have to ask them 3 times the same question 3 different ways, just to make sure that that answer is always consistent. Because I think there was a fear as well. Well, if I tell Mark all this information, is he going to use it against me? Right? So there's a fear factor there as well. With the tool, it's almost, in my mind, like Big Brother, where we don't necessarily, it's nice to understand a broad brush overview of the process, but then we can take the real data, like I showed, and really expose some areas of opportunity and share that with leadership. I think it's an easier buy-in type of activity as well.
Yeah, I like it both for existing processes like that and then designing the new process. And if you have this new process, you're not just saying, are you compliant to the old process and using it that way? You're saying, here's my new process. How different is it from my old process? Then that could help you with engaging those end users in change management too. Okay, maybe we need to hire someone here to do this new spot, or we need to build another software we forgot about because our process had that in there. We forgot. We need to include that in a new spot.
Right. We do some reallocation of resources as well. If we're automating a particular aspect of our flow or our process, well, then there's, again, that fear where's the human fit in that? And I always talk about reallocating resources to enhance the manual aspects of any process, because a lot of times you can't automate everything. You always need a human in the loop, so maybe we just, focus those resources where those resources are needed most.
That always helps with change management too, if people can picture where they're going to be in the new process after things have changed.
Right.
Absolutely. Well, I don't see any other questions coming in right now since we answered some during the webinar, and I think that we'll take this opportunity to wrap it up. Again, if you're looking at watching the video of this later, make sure to check us out for the next webinar and join some of our Immerse training. Put in right now for your expense to travel to Australia, and we'll see you down there. Thanks. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.